Arizona Territory, 1873. The smoke from burning homesteads still stained the horizon when Martha Caldwell found him. A small Apache boy, no more than 3, abandoned in the aftermath of violence. His dark eyes, wide with fear, reminded her of everything she had lost in the raid that took her husband and children just days before. Something in her broken heart stirred. Perhaps it was madness born of grief, or perhaps divine intervention. But she took him home that day, naming him Joseph after the son she had buried. 20 years passed. The boy became a man under her loving care, working the land they rebuilt together. But beneath their peaceful existence, a terrible truth remained buried in blood and ash. What would happen when Martha discovered that the child she saved was the very one who had innocently guided killers to her door? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Martha Caldwell's hands were rough as the Arizona landscape she tended. At 42, lines etched her once smooth face, deepened by sun and sorrow in equal measure. She worked her modest homestead with the quiet determination that had kept her alive these past 5 years since the raid. Dawn found her at the chicken coop, collecting eggs in a wicker basket. The morning ritual anchored her days. Sometimes, gathering eggs, she'd remember Thomas, her husband, building this very coop, whistling as he worked. Or Sarah, her daughter, naming each hen as though they were cherished pets. The memories came like ghosts, present but untouchable. Inside her cabin, a charred family Bible lay on a small wooden table by her bed. Its edges were blackened, pages singed, but the family record remained intact enough to read. Thomas Caldwell, husband, B. 1828, D. 1868. Sarah Caldwell, daughter, B. 1855, D. 1868. Joseph Caldwell, son, B. 1862, D. 1868. William Caldwell, son, B. 1865, D. 1868. Martha traced their names each night before prayers, a ritual of remembrance. The Bible was among the few possessions she'd salvaged from the ashes. The raiders had been thorough in their destruction, leaving little behind save cinders and grief. "Ma!" Joseph's voice called from outside. Wagons loaded with the goods for town. Martha closed the Bible gently. "Coming, Joseph." The boy, no, the young man, waited by their wagon, tall and straight-backed at 23. His dark skin and eyes marked him clearly as Apache, though he dressed like any frontier settler. Martha had never hidden his heritage from him, though she'd shared precious little about how she'd found him. "Mrs. Peterson asked if we'd bring extra eggs," he said. "Her hens aren't laying well." Martha nodded, adding another half-dozen to their goods. "The Petersons have always been kind to us, unlike others in town." She didn't say it, but Joseph understood. Stillwater wasn't large, barely 30 families, but it held the full spectrum of human nature. Some, like the Petersons and Dr. Miller, had accepted Joseph's presence in Martha's life. Others kept their distance, their suspicion barely concealed. Reverend Clark had once suggested, with careful words, that Martha might consider finding the boy more suitable arrangements with a missionary group working with Indian children. Martha's refusal had been polite but firm enough that he never raised the subject again. The wagon wheels creaked as they traveled the familiar path to town. Martha glanced at Joseph's profile, so familiar yet still sometimes startling in its foreignness to her own. In her dreams, sometimes, she still saw her blood son, fair-haired and freckled, laughing as he chased chickens around the yard. The boy who would never grow beyond 6 years old. "You're quiet today," Joseph observed. "Just thinking," Martha replied. They crested the hill that overlooked Stillwater, a collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets that passed for civilization in this territory. "Remember, if Sheriff Burke starts asking questions again, I know, Ma. Keep my answers simple and polite. Joseph's mouth tightened slightly. I've been doing it for 20 years. The sheriff's suspicions had never fully abated. Each time violence flared between settlers and Apaches in the territory, his gaze would find Joseph, as if searching for signs of betrayal. He means well, Martha said, though she wasn't entirely convinced of it herself. He's just protective of the town. Joseph made a non-committal sound, his eyes on the horizon. The Williams place has a new roof, he observed, changing the subject. Martha followed his gaze to the distant homestead. Mr. Williams mentioned they'd hired some men from the fort to help. We should think about redoing ours before winter, Joseph said. I noticed some weak spots last time it rained. Martha nodded, grateful for his practicality. The boy she'd raised had grown into a thoughtful man who anticipated needs before they became problems. Whatever else the years had brought, she couldn't deny the blessing Joseph had been in her life. As they approached town, Martha straightened her back, preparing for the familiar mixture of welcome and wariness that awaited them. 20 years, and still they were considered something of an oddity. The widow and her Apache son. Martha never spoke of that day, though it lived in her mind with terrible clarity. The smoke had been visible for miles, dark plumes rising from what had once been the Brennan place. Then the Jenkins homestead, then her own. She'd been in Stillwater when the raid happened, selling eggs and butter. Thomas and the children had stayed home. By the time she returned, driving the wagon at a desperate pace, there was nothing left but flames and silence. She found Thomas first, face down in the yard, his rifle still clutched in his hand. Sarah lay near the well, her water bucket overturned beside her. The boys, Joseph and William, were inside what remained of the cabin, huddled together beneath Thomas's old coat, as if they'd sought shelter there for more than just the attack. Martha remembered dropping to her knees, a sound escaping her that was more animal than human. She remembered gathering her children, one by one, laying them side by side as the cabin burned behind her. She remembered digging, her nails breaking against the hard earth, refusing help when neighbors finally arrived. 3 days after burying her family, Martha returned to the ruins. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps some part of her hoped to find something of them that remained, some small token to hold on to. Or perhaps she simply had nowhere else to go. The silence was absolute. No birds sang. No insects hummed. As if the land itself mourned what had happened there. That's when she heard it. A small, whimpering sound from behind the charred remains of their barn. Martha approached cautiously, half expecting to find an injured animal. Instead, she found a child. A boy, no more than 3, dressed in a tattered deerskin shirt. His small moccasins were worn through at the toes. Around his neck hung a tiny leather pouch decorated with beadwork. Apache. Martha froze. The raid had been Apache, everyone knew it. This child had been left behind, perhaps in the raiders' haste to escape pursuing soldiers. The boy looked up at her with eyes wide with fear and hunger. He said something in his language, a plaintive sound that needed no translation. Martha's hand went to the knife at her belt. One of the raiders' people, here among the ashes of her life. Her fingers tightened on the handle. The boy spoke again, reaching out one small hand toward her. Later, Martha would never be able to explain what happened next, even to herself. She knelt before the child, this enemy's child, and saw only his vulnerability, his need. Something inside her that had died with her family flickered back to life. She took a piece of jerky from her pocket and held it out. The boy snatched it, devouring it with desperate speed. When he finished, he looked up at her expectantly. "More?" she asked, miming eating. The boy nodded vigorously. Martha hesitated only a moment before lifting him into her arms. He was light, too light, and he smelled of smoke and fear. He didn't resist, instead curling against her chest with surprising trust. "Shoo!" she whispered. You're safe now. On the journey back to town, Martha kept the child hidden beneath a blanket in her wagon. She told herself she would bring him to the fort, or perhaps to Reverend Clark, someone who would know what to do with an Apache child. But as dusk fell and they stopped to make camp, the boy crawled into her lap as she sat by the fire. He touched her cheek with small fingers, studying her tears with solemn curiosity. "Mama?" he asked, the word clearly learned from somewhere. Martha's breath caught. Before she could stop herself, she'd pulled him close, her tears falling into his dark hair. By morning, she knew she would keep him. It defied all reason, all the bitter hatred that had filled her since the raid. But holding this child, she felt purpose return to her empty life. She found one of her dead son's shirts in the wagon and dressed the boy in it, tucking the moccasins and medicine pouch into her own bag. If anyone asked, he was a half-breed orphan she'd agreed to take in. No one needed to know where she'd found him. "Joseph," she whispered, trying the name that had belonged to her son. The boy looked up, curious at her tone. "Your name is Joseph now." The first month was the hardest. The boy, Joseph as she'd named him, spoke no English and Martha knew no Apache. They communicated through gestures and expressions, a language of necessity. He cried often in the night, calling out words Martha couldn't understand, reaching for people who weren't there. Martha built them a small cabin a mile from her old homestead. She couldn't bear to rebuild on the same ground where her family had died. The new place was simpler, just 2 rooms and a lean-to for storage, but it was theirs, a fresh start if such a thing were possible. "Here," Martha said one evening, holding out a small wooden horse. It was crude but recognizable, carved by Thomas for their son's 5th birthday. She'd found it in the wagon, overlooked in her rush to town that fateful day. "This is for you." Joseph took it cautiously, turning it over in his small hands. His face lit with recognition, a child's universal appreciation for toys. He made galloping motions with it across the floor, accompanying them with sounds that needed no translation. Martha watched him, a complicated warmth spreading through her chest. In these moments, she could almost forget where he'd come from. Almost. Dr. Thomas Miller was the first to know the truth. He'd come to check on Martha after hearing about her new ward, and found her struggling to communicate with a feverish Joseph. "Apache, isn't he?" Miller asked quietly, examining the boy's ears and throat. Martha stiffened. "Half-breed," she said, the lie sticking in her throat. "His mother was a laundress at the fort. Died of fever." Miller's kind eyes held hers for a long moment. "Martha," he said gently, "I'm not the sheriff. I don't need a story. I need to know what herbs this child might be familiar with to help bring down his fever." Martha's composure cracked. "I found him after the raid. He was alone." The doctor nodded, unsurprised. "You've got courage, Martha Caldwell. Not many would do what you're doing." "Is it courage or madness?" she whispered. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Miller reached into his bag. "Here, willow bark tea. Universal medicine, Apache or white." After that, Miller became their ally, teaching Martha what he knew of Apache customs from his time as an army doctor. He brought books and small gifts for Joseph, treating the boy with the same kindness he showed all children. Others were less accepting. Reverend Clark came to call, his face grave with concern. "This is most irregular, Mrs. Caldwell," he said, watching Joseph play in the yard. "The boy belongs with his own kind." "He belongs with me," Martha replied, surprised by her own fierceness. "The Apaches killed your family?" Clark reminded her, as if she needed reminding. "This child is innocent," Martha interrupted. "Would you have me turn away an orphan child? There are missions dedicated to such children, places where they can be properly civilized." Martha's hands tightened around her teacup. "Thank you for your concern, Reverend, but Joseph stays with me." The days fell into a rhythm. Martha taught Joseph English words, pointing to objects and naming them. He was quick to learn, his young mind absorbing the new language rapidly. He began to help with small chores, fetching eggs, carrying kindling, feeding the chickens they'd acquired. The first time he called her mother in English, Martha was hanging laundry. The word was clear, deliberate, an offering from him to her. Martha knelt before him, eye to eye. "Yes," she said, her voice thick. "I am your mother now." That night, she took out the small beaded moccasin she'd kept from the day she found him. She'd removed both from his feet that first day, replacing them with leather shoes she'd made herself. But she'd kept one, hidden in her trunk beneath winter blankets, a reminder of who he was, who he had been. Martha ran her fingers over the intricate beadwork. Someone had made these with love for a child. Perhaps his real mother, now dead or believing her son dead. For the first time, Martha allowed herself to wonder about the woman who had borne this child. Had she grieved for him as Martha grieved for her own? By the time Joseph turned 7, Martha knew she couldn't put off his schooling any longer. He was bright, curious, and quick to learn, too quick to be satisfied with just her teachings. "You'll need to be brave," she told him the night before his first day, adjusting the collar of his new shirt. She'd saved for months to buy the fabric. The other children, they might not be kind at first. Joseph nodded solemnly. In his 7 years, he'd already learned that the world treated him differently. The stares in town, the whispers behind hands, the way some mothers pulled their children closer when he passed. All had taught him lessons no child should learn so young. "I'm brave like Pa was," he said, referring to Thomas Caldwell, a man he knew only through Martha's stories. Martha's heart twisted. Yes, just like him. The McGrath School was a one-room building serving all of Stillwater's children. Miss Hayes, the teacher, was a young woman from Boston who prided herself on progressive thinking. She welcomed Joseph with a genuine smile that relieved some of Martha's anxiety. That relief was short-lived. By noon, Joseph had returned home with a bloody nose and a torn primer. "They called me savage," he said, his voice steady even as tears threatened. "Billy Cooper said I'd scalp them in their sleep." Martha cleaned his face gently. "Did you fight back?" A pause. "Yes." "Good." The word surprised them both. Martha had always taught him to turn the other cheek, as the Bible instructed. But sitting there, looking at her son's bruised face, righteous anger flared in her. "Sometimes, Joseph, we must stand our ground." The primer told its own story. In the margins, someone had drawn crude pictures of feathered Indians attacking white settlers. Words like savage and redskin were scrawled across the lessons. That evening, Martha marched to the Cooper farm. Mrs. Cooper received her coolly on the porch, not inviting her inside. "Your boy needs to control himself," she said. Billy came home with a black eye. "Your boy needs to watch his tongue," Martha replied, "and learn some Christian charity." Mrs. Cooper's face hardened. "It ain't natural what you're doing. Apache killed your family, and here you are raising one like he's your own blood." "He is my son," Martha said, each word clear and firm. "He's an Indian. Sooner or later, blood tells." Martha left without another word, her hands shaking with anger. She found Joseph sitting on their porch steps, whittling a stick with careful concentration. "Am I different?" he asked without looking up. Martha sat beside him. "Yes," she said after a moment, "but different isn't wrong. Why do I look like this and you look like that?" The question she'd been dreading. "Because you were born to Apache parents," she said carefully. Joseph considered this. "But you're my mother." "I am now. I found you when you were very small, after your first parents were gone." "Gone where?" Martha hesitated. "I don't know, Joseph. There was trouble, fighting between the Apache and the settlers. Many people died." "Like Pa and my brothers and sister?" "Yes." The word felt like a stone in her throat. Joseph was quiet for a long time. The kids at school said Apaches are bad, that they kill people. Some do, Martha said, just as some white men kill. But most just want to live in peace, I think. Am I bad? No. Martha gathered him close, this child who carried the blood of those who had destroyed her world. You are good, Joseph. Never doubt that. That night, she heard him crying. When she went to him, he was sitting up in bed, his small face wet with tears. I don't want to be Apache, he whispered. I want to be like you. Martha held him until he slept, her own tears falling silently. What right had she to raise this child? To take him from his culture, his people? Yet what choice did she have? To turn him away would have been another kind of cruelty. In the years that followed, Joseph attended school sporadically. When the taunting became too much, Martha would teach him at home for a while, then try again. Miss Hayes did her best to protect him, but she was one woman against generations of prejudice. Despite it all, Joseph thrived. He had a natural affinity for animals and an intuitive understanding of the land that Martha recognized came from his heritage. By 10, he could track game better than most grown men in Stillwater. By 12, he was helping neighboring farms break horses that no one else could tame. Joseph was 12 the year Captain James Reed rode into their lives. Martha spotted the dust from approaching horses while hanging laundry and called to Joseph, who was mending a fence nearby. Riders coming, she said, shading her eyes against the sun. Military by the looks of it. Joseph straightened, instantly alert. Though young, he had developed a wariness of soldiers that Martha understood all too well. For men approached on horseback, led by an officer with a weathered face and ramrod-straight posture. A silver badge glinted on his uniform jacket. Martha recognized the insignia of the 7th Cavalry, known for their campaigns against the Apache. Ma'am, the leader touched his hat brim. Captain James Reed. Hope we're not intruding. Martha Caldwell, she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. What brings the army to our doorstep, Captain? Just passing through. Tracking a small band of Apache reported in the area. His eyes shifted to Joseph, who stood half-hidden behind the fence post. Something flickered across Reed's face, a sharpening of interest. Your boy. Martha moved slightly, positioning herself between Reed and Joseph. My son. Reed nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on Joseph's features. Fine-looking lad. There was something in his tone that sent a chill through Martha. Water's fresh if your men are thirsty, she offered, hoping to divert his attention. The soldiers dismounted gratefully, but Reed's focus remained on Joseph. While his men watered their horses, the captain approached the boy. How old are you, son? He asked. 12, sir, Joseph answered, his voice carefully neutral. 12, Reed repeated thoughtfully. Born during the Troubles, then. Martha tensed. Joseph, please fetch our guests some coffee. Joseph hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her alone with Reed, but obeyed. As soon as he was out of earshot, Martha turned to the captain. What do you want, Captain Reed? Reed removed his hat, revealing graying hair. Just making conversation, Mrs. Caldwell. He glanced toward the house where Joseph had disappeared. Unusual. A woman alone raising an Apache boy out here. Half Apache, Martha corrected automatically, the familiar lie springing to her lips. His father was a prospector. Reed smiled slightly. If you say so, ma'am. Before Martha could respond, Joseph returned with coffee. Reed accepted a cup, studying Joseph over its rim. You have a look about you, he said. Reminds me of someone. Joseph shifted uncomfortably. Sir. Was stationed at Fort Grant 5 years back. Had some dealings with a band of Chiricahua, led by a warrior called Black Knife. Reed sipped his coffee. You favor him somewhat. Martha's hand tightened around her own cup. Black Knife. She'd heard the name whispered in town, one of the leaders of the raid that had destroyed her family. Joseph was born near Tucson, she said quickly. I doubt there's any connection. Reed made a non-committal sound. Blood has a way of showing itself. He set down his empty cup. Thank you for the hospitality, Mrs. Caldwell. We'll be moving on. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Reed paused by Martha. Word of advice, he said quietly. Boy that age starts wondering about his roots, starts looking for his own kind. His gaze drifted to the distant mountains. Black Knife's band is still out there. Some say he's looking for something he lost. Martha felt cold despite the warm day. My son knows where he belongs. Reed settled his hat back on his head. Blood tells in the end, Mrs. Caldwell. I've seen it time and again with these half-breeds. No offense meant. After the soldiers departed, Martha found Joseph sitting on the porch steps, unusually quiet. What did he mean about Black Knife? He finally asked. Martha sat beside him, choosing her words carefully. Just soldier talk. They always have stories. He said I look like him. You look like you, Martha said firmly. No one else. Joseph picked up a stick, drawing patterns in the dirt. Do you know who my real parents were? The question hung between them, dangerous as a coiled snake. Martha had prepared for this moment for years, yet now found herself without words. I found you alone, she said finally. There was no one to tell me. It wasn't quite a lie, but the omission weighed on her. Joseph seemed to sense her discomfort and didn't press further. But that night, Martha noticed him studying his reflection in her small mirror, tracing the contours of his face as if searching for someone else within his features. The visit from Captain Reed left a mark on Joseph that deepened as he grew into his 15th year. Martha would find him poring over any books he could find about the Apache, studying illustrations with intense concentration. His questions became more frequent, more specific, pressing against the boundaries of what Martha was willing to share. One autumn afternoon, Martha returned early from town to find Joseph behind the barn, kneeling before a small fire. He was so absorbed in what he was doing that he didn't hear her approach. His hands moved in a pattern over the smoke, his lips forming words in a language she didn't understand. Joseph, she called, startling him. He jumped to his feet, quickly stamping out the fire. Something small and leather disappeared into his pocket. What are you doing? Martha asked, though she feared she already knew. Joseph's face was a conflict of defiance and shame. Nothing wrong. I didn't say it was wrong. I asked what it was. He hesitated, then slowly withdrew the object from his pocket. A small medicine pouch, similar to the one he'd worn as a child, but newly made. Miguel showed me how to make it, he admitted. Miguel Vasquez was an elderly Mexican trader who passed through Stillwater several times a year. He'd fought Apache in his youth but had developed a respect for them that bordered on admiration. And the words? Martha gestured vaguely at the extinguished fire. A prayer. Joseph's chin lifted slightly. For guidance. Something cold settled in Martha's stomach. Guidance for what? To know who I am. The words burst from him with sudden intensity. I'm not like you, not like anyone in town. I need to know where I come from. You come from here, Martha said, her voice sharper than intended. This home, this life we've built. Half a life, Joseph countered. Everything I know about being Apache comes from books or Miguel's stories. It's like there's another person inside me I've never met. Martha turned away, unable to face the raw need in his eyes. It's getting dark. Supper needs tending. Mother. Joseph rarely called her that anymore, having switched to my years ago. The formal word stopped her. Please, tell me what you know. Martha closed her eyes briefly. Come inside. At the kitchen table, Martha poured them both coffee before speaking. I told you I found you after a raid, she began carefully. That much is true. You were alone, abandoned in the confusion. Which band? Joseph pressed. Was it Black Knife's people, like the captain said? Martha's hands tightened around her cup. I don't know. There was no one to ask. You're lying. Joseph's voice was low but certain. There's something you're not telling me. Martha met his gaze. This boy she'd raised as her own, now looking at her with a stranger's suspicious eyes. What would you have me say? That I know the people who bore you? I don't. That I can tell you about Apache ways? I can't. Then let me find someone who can. Joseph stood, pacing the small kitchen. Miguel says there's an old Apache who lives near the trading post at Coyote Springs. A medicine man. He could teach me. No. The word cut through the air like a knife. It's too dangerous. Because I might find my real people? My real family? The accusation struck Martha like a physical blow. Because I am your real family, she said, her voice breaking. Because I've loved you and raised you and kept you safe for 12 years. From what? Joseph demanded. From knowing who I truly am? Martha stood so abruptly her chair toppled backward. From becoming what destroyed everything I loved. The words hung between them, impossible to take back. Joseph stared at her, the color draining from his face. Joseph, Martha whispered, reaching for him. I didn't mean. He backed away from her touch. Without another word, he strode out the door into the gathering dusk. Martha sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her. What had she done? The fear she'd carried since finding him, that raising an Apache child was tempting fate, inviting destruction back into her life, had finally spoken itself aloud. Joseph didn't return until well after midnight. Martha sat waiting, a lamp burning low on the table. When he finally entered, his face was composed, remote in a way she'd never seen before. I won't run away, he said quietly. I owe you that much, but I need to know the truth, all of it. Not just what you think I should hear. Martha nodded slowly. There's a trunk in my room, she said. Under the bed. It has things I kept. From when I found you. Joseph held her gaze for a long moment. Thank you, he said finally, then disappeared into his small bedroom. Martha remained at the table until dawn, wondering if this was how it felt to lose a child for the second time. At 18, Joseph Caldwell had grown into a man who turned heads. Tall and lean, with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, he moved through Stillwater with a presence that couldn't be ignored. Though most knew him simply as Martha's adopted son, newcomers often mistook him for a visiting Apache scout or trader, surprised to hear him speak perfect English in a voice that carried hints of Martha's own accent. Joseph's skill with horses had become legendary in the territory. Ranchers from as far as Tucson brought their most difficult animals to him, paying good money for his gentle but firm training methods. The income allowed him and Martha to expand their homestead, adding a proper barn and improving the cabin. Another satisfied customer, Joseph said, counting out bills at the kitchen table after delivering a newly trained stallion to the Davis Ranch. Mr. Davis said his daughter's getting married next spring. Wants me to train a matched pair for her wedding gift. Martha smiled, genuinely proud. You've built quite a reputation. Their relationship had stabilized in the years since their confrontation over his heritage. Joseph still sought knowledge about Apache ways, reading, speaking with travelers, even crafting traditional tools and weapons, but he did so with less secrecy and defiance. Martha, for her part, had slowly loosened her grip on the past, allowing him space to explore his identity without seeing it as rejection. Saturday afternoons typically found them in town for supplies. On this particular day, Joseph was loading flour and coffee into their wagon when Emma Larson approached. The shopkeeper's daughter was a year younger than Joseph, with honey-brown hair and a quiet intelligence that set her apart from other young women in Stillwater. "Hello, Joseph," she said, holding a package. "Pa asked if you dropped this at the Wilsons' place on your way home. It's Mrs. Wilson's medicine." Joseph nodded. "Of course." Emma lingered, shifting slightly. I finished that book you lent me, about the Apache creation stories. Joseph's interest quickened. Few in town would voluntarily read such material. What did you think? It was fascinating. Different from what Reverend Clark teaches, but... She glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. I think there's wisdom in it, in knowing many paths to understanding the world. Their conversation continued, moving from books to horses to the upcoming harvest festival. Martha, watching from the mercantile doorway, noted the easy way they spoke, the slight flush on Emma's cheeks, the unusual animation in Joseph's typically reserved expression. Your boy's sweet on my Emma, said a voice beside her. Samuel Larson, Emma's father, had joined her unnoticed. Martha tensed. Mr. Larson. He raised a hand. No need for alarm, Mrs. Caldwell. Joseph's a fine young man. Works hard, speaks true. Can't fault him for things he can't help. The qualified approval was more than Martha had expected from Stillwater's most prominent merchant. As they drove home, Joseph was unusually talkative, recounting details of his conversation with Emma that Martha had already witnessed. She's invited me to supper next Friday, he concluded. Her father approved it. Martha raised an eyebrow. Samuel Larson approved you calling on his daughter? Joseph's expression sobered. He said, as long as I remember certain natural boundaries, whatever that means. Martha understood all too well. Friendship was one thing, courtship another entirely. Joseph, I know, Ma, he interrupted gently. I'm not a fool, but Emma's different. She sees me, not just... He gestured to his face, his skin. Before Martha could respond, they noticed a commotion ahead. A group of men surrounded a solitary figure on the road, an elderly Apache man, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Sheriff Burke stood to one side, hand on his pistol. Joseph pulled the wagon to a stop. What's happening? One of the men turned, Bill Cooper, now grown but still with the same mean look he'd had as a boy. None of your business, Injun. Keep moving. Joseph handed Martha the reins and stepped down from the wagon. Joseph, she warned, but he was already approaching the group. Is there trouble, Sheriff? He asked calmly. Burke frowned. This old man was caught stealing chickens from the Peterson place. Says he was just asking for food. The elderly Apache man looked at Joseph with surprise, then spoke rapidly in his native tongue. Joseph responded hesitantly, using the few Apache words he'd learned from books and travelers. What's he saying? Burke demanded. That he's hungry, traveling to meet his grandson at the reservation. Joseph straightened. I'll pay for the chickens and see him safely on his way. Cooper stepped forward. Since when do you speak Injun, Joseph? Been practicing for when you join your people on the warpath. Sheriff Burke raised a hand. That's enough, Cooper. Joseph's offering a fair solution. He turned to Joseph. $2 for the chickens. And he's your responsibility until he's out of our territory. News traveled swiftly in small towns. By Tuesday, all of Stillwater knew that Joseph Caldwell had intervened on behalf of an Apache elder, and that Emma Larson had invited him to supper. The two events, occurring on the same day, stirred the town's simmering pot of gossip to a boil. Martha was hanging laundry when she heard wheels on the road. A small buggy approached, driven by Reverend Clark. Beside him sat a woman Martha didn't recognize, middle-aged, with graying brown hair and the stiff posture of someone unused to frontier travel. Mrs. Caldwell, Clark called, helping the woman down. May I introduce Mrs. Eleanor Wilson? She's just arrived from Kansas City to join her brother's household. Martha wiped her hands on her apron. Welcome to Stillwater, Mrs. Wilson. Eleanor Wilson had the weathered look of someone who had endured much. Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. Reverend Clark insisted I meet you. Said you're something of a local legend. Hardly that, Martha replied, embarrassed. Just a widow who's managed to keep her land. Mrs. Wilson will be staying with her brother, Dr. Miller, Clark explained. I'm introducing her around town. Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. Thomas Miller had never mentioned a sister. Please, come in for tea. Inside, Martha busied herself with the kettle while the visitors settled at her small table. Eleanor's gaze swept the cabin, taking in the modest furnishings with an appraising eye. Dr. Miller is your brother? Martha asked, setting out cups. Eleanor nodded. Half-brother, actually. We reconnected through letters after my husband passed last year. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. William was a good man. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. My second husband, actually. My first. She trailed off, glancing at Reverend Clark. The Reverend cleared his throat. Mrs. Wilson lost her first family in the territory some years back. During the Troubles. Martha's hand stilled on the teapot. The Apache raids? Eleanor's face tightened. Yes, near Tucson. 1868. The same year. The same raids that had taken Martha's family. She set the teapot down carefully, suddenly aware of her trembling hands. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. I lost my husband and children then as well. Eleanor looked at her with new interest, a flash of shared understanding passing between them. Thomas mentioned you'd experienced similar loss. It's partly why I wanted to meet you. The front door opened, and Joseph entered, removing his hat. Ma, I finished with the... He stopped, noticing the visitors. My son Joseph, Martha said, the familiar introduction suddenly feeling precarious. Joseph, this is Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Miller's sister. And you know Reverend Clark. Joseph nodded politely. Ma'am, Reverend. Eleanor stared at Joseph, her teacup frozen halfway to her lips. Something flickered in her eyes. Confusion, then a deepening scrutiny that made Martha's heart race. Your son, Eleanor finally said, setting down her cup with exaggerated care. Adopted, Martha explained quickly. After I lost my family. Joseph, sensing the sudden tension, excused himself to return to his chores. As he turned to leave, Eleanor's gaze followed him with unsettling intensity. He has a very distinctive look, she observed after he'd gone. Martha busied herself pouring tea. Joseph has been with me since he was 3. He's a fine young man. I'm sure he is. Eleanor sipped her tea, her eyes distant. There's something familiar about him. Something in the way he holds himself, perhaps. Reverend Clark, perhaps sensing Martha's discomfort, steered the conversation towards safer topics. The church social, the need for a schoolteacher since Miss Hayes had married and moved away, the mild weather they'd been enjoying. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor paused at the door. How did you come to adopt an Apache child? It seems an unusual choice, given the circumstances. The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken implications. Martha chose her words carefully. He needed a mother. I needed a child. Sometimes Providence works in unexpected ways. Eleanor studied her face. Indeed, though I find it takes extraordinary grace to embrace what reminds us of our deepest pain. She glanced toward the barn where Joseph worked. I lost a daughter in the raid. She would have been about his age now. After they departed, Martha sank into a chair, her composure finally cracking. She pulled a yellowed newspaper clipping from between the pages of her Bible, an account of the raids near Tucson, listing the families lost. Among them, Wilson family Edward, 42, Eleanor, 38, survived, and Mary, 8. Eleanor Wilson had survived the same raid that had taken Martha's family. The same raid that Joseph, as an Apache child, had some connection to, a connection Martha had spent 20 years trying not to examine too closely. Now Eleanor was here, looking at Joseph with eyes that searched for something familiar. Martha pressed her hand against her mouth, stifling a sound between a prayer and a moan. Joseph drove the wagon to Coyote Springs Trading Post alone, a journey he'd made many times but never with such purpose. The settlement was larger than Stillwater, a bustling crossroads where Apache, Mexican, and white traders conducted business with cautious civility. He'd told Martha he was going to purchase supplies and deliver a newly trained horse to a rancher. Both were true but incomplete. What drew him was news that an old Apache man called Medicine Fox was staying near the trading post. The same man who had helped the elderly Apache traveler on the road last week had sent word through Miguel. The one who speaks with feet in two worlds should come. Medicine Fox remembers stories of Black Knife's band. Joseph completed his business efficiently, then made his way to a small camp at the settlement's edge. Several Apache families had set up temporary lodgings there, tolerated by the local authorities as long as they traded and caused no trouble. Medicine Fox sat outside a canvas shelter, his face deeply lined, his eyes alert despite his advanced years. He nodded as Joseph approached. "I am told you are called Joseph Caldwell," he said in accented English. "Yet you carry Apache blood." Joseph settled cross-legged before him. "I was raised by a white woman after being found abandoned as a child." The old man studied him. "Not abandoned. Lost. There is a difference." He switched to Apache language, speaking slowly. Joseph shook his head regretfully. "I know very little of our tongue." Medicine Fox sighed. "This is the tragedy of our children, separated from their language, their stories." He reached for a worn leather journal beside him. "I have kept the stories here, in the white man's writing, for those like you who come searching." Joseph accepted the journal with reverence. "I was told you might know of Black Knife's band." "Ah!" Medicine Fox's expression grew somber. "Why do you ask of them?" "A soldier once said I resembled Black Knife." The old man leaned forward, scrutinizing Joseph's features. "There is a likeness, yes. In the eyes, the cheekbones." He settled back. "Black Knife was a great warrior of the Chiricahua. During the Troubles, when the white settlers pushed into our lands, he led many raids." "Near Tucson?" Joseph asked, his mouth suddenly dry. "In 1868? Medicine Fox nodded slowly. "The year of great sorrow. Many died on both sides. Black Knife lost his younger brother in a battle with soldiers. After that, his heart turned hard as stone." Joseph hesitated. "Was there a child with Black Knife's band?" The old man's eyes sharpened with interest. "Black Knife's son, a boy of 3 summers." He paused, watching Joseph closely. "The child was lost during a raid. Some said killed by soldiers, others that he was taken by settlers. Black Knife searched for many seasons, but never found him." Something stirred in Joseph's mind. Fragmented images, like looking through broken glass. A fire, men on horses, a hand holding his running through chaparral. "This journal," Medicine Fox continued, tapping the leather cover, "contains accounts from our people, including the raids of 1868. Joseph's fingers tightened on the book. "May I read it? It is why I kept it. For those who seek their history." Medicine Fox reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object. This belonged to Black Knife's son. It was found near where he was lost. He placed a tiny moccasin in Joseph's palm, the match to the one Martha had kept hidden all these years. Joseph stared at it, his world tilting sideways. "Black Knife," he whispered. "Is he still alive?" "He lives in the mountains to the south. An old man now, like me, still mourning his lost son." Joseph rode home in a daze, the journal and moccasin secured in his saddlebag. Images flickered through his mind, disconnected memories surfacing like debris after a flood. A man's deep voice singing in Apache. The smell of mesquite smoke. Running alongside horses, laughing. At home, Martha was unusually quiet, watching him with worried eyes as he stabled his horse. "Mrs. Wilson came by again," she said finally. "She asked many questions about you." Joseph looked up sharply. "What kind of questions?" About when I found you. Where? Martha's hands twisted in her apron. She said there was something about your face that troubled her dreams. That night, Joseph read Medicine Fox's journal by lamplight. The account of the raids was detailed, written from the Apache perspective. Their desperation as hunting grounds were seized, promises broken, children dying of diseases brought by settlers. Then he found it, the passage describing a raid near Tucson. Black Knife's 3-year-old son had accompanied the warriors, not to fight but because his mother was dead and there was no one to leave him with. The child had served as an innocent guide, his sharp eyes spotting homesteads hidden among the hills, homesteads he'd seen while hunting with his father in happier times. Joseph's hands trembled as he read on. During the chaos of the raid, the boy had become separated from the warriors. Despite searching for days, they never found him. The last line struck Joseph like a physical blow. The lost child's name was Nate, mischievous one, for his laughing spirit. Eleanor Wilson arrived unannounced the following afternoon, a small wooden box tucked under her arm. Martha saw her approaching from the kitchen window and felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, wiping her hands and stepping onto the porch. "This is unexpected." Eleanor's face was set with determination. "I've brought some things I thought might interest you. Items I saved from before the raid." Martha hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Please, come in." Inside, Eleanor placed the box on the table and removed the lid. "After my husband and daughter died, I couldn't bear to look at these. But I couldn't part with them either." She withdrew a child's doll, a faded daguerreotype of a solemn-faced man, a woman's handkerchief, the sad inventory of a life destroyed. Martha watched in silent sympathy, knowing too well the weight such objects carried. "This was the last thing Mary received before she died," Eleanor said softly, lifting out a small necklace. A distinctive silver pendant hung from a leather cord, an unusual design with a turquoise stone set in its center. "A gift from a trader who stayed with us. He said it would protect her." Martha froze, recognition jolting through her. She'd seen this necklace before, or one exactly like it, in a small pouch hidden among Joseph's few Apache possessions when she'd found him. The front door opened, and Joseph entered, hat in hand. "Ma, I've finished with the—" He stopped, seeing Eleanor. For a moment, the three stood in a tableau of suspended time. Then Joseph's eyes fell on the necklace in Eleanor's hand, and the color drained from his face. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. Eleanor stared at him, her expression shifting from surprise to something harder. "It was my daughter's. She wore it the day she died." Joseph took a step backward, his back hitting the door. His breathing quickened, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrible recognition. "Joseph!" Martha moved toward him, alarmed. He shook his head, not seeing her, lost in something visible only to him. "The girl with yellow hair," he murmured. "She showed me her necklace, said it was magic." Eleanor rose slowly, the necklace clutched in her trembling hand. "What did you say?" Joseph's eyes focused on her, filled with dawning horror. "She was hiding in the root cellar. I found her. I thought we were playing a game." Martha felt the room spin around her. "Joseph, what are you saying?" But she knew. God help her, she knew. "I led them there," Joseph said, his voice hollow. "My father's warriors. I didn't understand what would happen. I was just showing them where people lived." Eleanor made a small, wounded sound. "You were there?" "At my home." Joseph nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming down his face. "Your Black Knife son," Martha whispered, the final piece falling into place. "The lost child." "I remember now," Joseph said, his voice breaking. "The girl, your daughter. She showed me her hiding place the week before, when I was there with my father. He was trading with your husband." He looked at Eleanor with agonized eyes. "When the warriors came, I thought it was a game. I showed them where she was hiding." Eleanor's face contorted with grief and rage. She lunged forward, the necklace thrust before her like an accusation. You led them to my Mary? You're the reason they found her. Mrs. Wilson. Martha stepped between them. And you. Eleanor turned on Martha, her voice shaking. You took in the child who helped kill your own family and mine? Did you know? All these years. Did you know what he was? No, Martha whispered. I only knew he was a child who needed me. Joseph slid down against the door until he sat on the floor, his head in his hands. I remember it all now. The raids, the fires, being separated from my father during the fighting, walking for days lost. He looked up at Martha with devastated eyes. And you, finding me. A horrible silence filled the cabin. 3 lives connected by an unthinkable truth. The orphaned Apache child Martha had raised as her own son was the very one who had unwittingly guided warriors to her family, to Eleanor's family. Eleanor stared at Joseph, her body rigid with shock. You're the boy, she whispered, the one the Apache brave was carrying. I saw you from where I was hiding in the woods. You pointed to our cellar door. Joseph couldn't meet her gaze. I didn't understand. I was 3 years old. I thought, his voice broke. I thought we were playing hide and seek. Martha moved to Joseph, kneeling before him. Everything she'd feared, every nightmare that had haunted her for 20 years, crystallized in this moment. Yet looking at her son, for he was still her son, she found the hatred she'd expected to feel wouldn't come. Joseph, she said softly, reaching for his hand. He flinched away. Don't touch me. Don't. He rose suddenly, pushing past her. I need to go. Before either woman could speak, he was out the door, running toward the barn. Joseph rode without direction, pushing his horse harder than he should have, desperate to outrun the truth that clung to him like a shadow. Images flooded his mind, memories unlocked after 20 years. His father's stern face painted for war, warriors moving silently through mesquite, the terrified eyes of the yellow-haired girl as he pointed to her hiding place. Night fell, but still he rode, until his exhausted horse refused to go farther. He dismounted in a small canyon, collapsing against a boulder. Above him, stars wheeled in cold indifference to the human tragedy playing out beneath them. I killed them, he whispered to the darkness. I killed her family, my own family. The paradox was unbearable. He was both victim and perpetrator, innocent and guilty, the lost child and the destroyer of homes. How could he have lived all these years under Martha's roof, accepting her love, never knowing it was his actions that had left her alone in the world? And Martha, had she known? Some part of him wanted to believe she had, that her love had been an act of extraordinary grace rather than blind ignorance. But the horror in her eyes told him otherwise. She'd saved him, raised him, protected him from those who saw only his Apache blood, never suspecting he was the architect of her greatest sorrow. Back at the cabin, Martha sat motionless at the table. Eleanor had left hours ago, her departure a blur of grief and confusion. The broken family portrait lay on the floor where Joseph had knocked it in his rush to escape. Its frame splintered, glass shattered across the wooden boards. Martha stared at it, seeing in its destruction a perfect mirror of her life. Everything she had built, the careful story she had constructed around herself and Joseph, lay in ruins. She should hate him. 20 years ago, she had buried her husband and children, victims of an Apache raid. Now she knew that Joseph, her Joseph, had played a role in their deaths. Logic, justice, even basic human instinct demanded she reject him, cast him out, turn her back on 2 decades of love. Yet as dawn broke, Martha found herself standing at the window, scanning the horizon for his return. The love of 20 years could not be undone in a single moment, even by a revelation this devastating. Whatever Joseph had done as a child, the man he had become under her care was good, kind, honorable. Could she blame a 3-year-old for actions he couldn't understand? But Eleanor would. Her eyes had held no room for forgiveness, only the raw wound of reopened grief. And she would tell others. The story would spread through Stillwater like wildfire. Joseph Caldwell, Martha's Apache son, had led the raid that killed her family, that killed other families. Martha sank to her knees beside the broken portrait, carefully gathering the pieces. Her fingers traced the faces of her lost family, then moved to Joseph's image at the edge of the frame, a photograph taken on his 16th birthday, his serious expression so at odds with the laughter that usually lit his eyes. Two families, two griefs, one impossible truth binding them together. At first light, Joseph watered his horse at a small stream, then turned back toward home. He had nowhere else to go, and Martha deserved better than his cowardly flight. She deserved the truth, and his departure if she wished it. The journey back seemed both eternal and too brief. With each mile, Joseph composed and discarded the words he would say to the woman who had been his mother. No explanation could suffice. No apology could heal this wound. He approached the cabin slowly, seeing Martha on the porch, waiting. She stood as he dismounted, her face pale from a sleepless night, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. For a long moment, they regarded each other across an unbridgeable divide of blood and memory. Then Joseph spoke the only truth that mattered. "I'll go," he said quietly. "You never have to see me again." Martha's hand tightened on the porch railing. "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me." Martha's voice was soft but firm. "You are my son, Joseph. Nothing can change that." Joseph shook his head, disbelieving. "How can you say that? After what I did?" "What did you do, Joseph?" "You were 3 years old. I led them to your family, to our home." Martha closed her eyes briefly. "You didn't know what would happen. You couldn't have known." Joseph mounted the porch steps slowly, stopping at a distance that felt both respectful and unbearable. "I remember them now," he said. "Your husband, your children. I saw them before." Martha nodded, a single tear tracking down her weathered cheek. "Then tell me about them. Help me remember them too." Word spread through Stillwater like a grass fire, whispers at first, then open speculation. Eleanor Wilson had spoken to her brother, who in turn had confided in Reverend Clark. Though they had intended discretion, such explosive knowledge couldn't be contained. Martha noticed the change immediately on their next trip to town. Conversations halted when she entered the mercantile. Eyes followed Joseph with new wariness. Samuel Larson, previously cordial, watched from behind his counter with a troubled expression. "We should go," Joseph murmured, feeling the weight of stares. Martha straightened her spine. "We need supplies. We won't be chased off." They continued their shopping in strained silence. As Joseph loaded their purchases into the wagon, Sheriff Burke approached, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Mrs. Caldwell," he nodded. "Joseph." Martha acknowledged him warily. "Sheriff." Burke shifted, uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's been talk about Joseph's history." "There's always talk in Stillwater," Martha replied evenly. "This is different." Burke lowered his voice. "Mrs. Wilson has made some claims. Serious ones." Joseph stilled, a sack of flour half lifted. "What exactly is she saying, Sheriff?" Burke studied him, eyes narrowed. "That you were part of the Apache band that raided settlements near Tucson. That you helped them find their victims." "I was 3 years old," Joseph said quietly. "So it's true then?" Burke's hand shifted subtly closer to his pistol. Martha stepped between them. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "That a child barely old enough to speak was responsible for raids conducted by warriors." Burke had the grace to look uncomfortable. "No, ma'am, but folks are upset. They're saying Joseph's father was Black Knife himself." Joseph met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Based on what I've learned, that appears to be true. A small crowd had gathered at a distance, watching the exchange. Among them, Martha spotted Emma Larson, her face pale with concern. "Well," Burke said, "that changes things, does it?" Martha challenged. "Joseph has lived here for 20 years. You've known him since he was a boy. Has he ever given you cause to doubt his character?" "It ain't about his character, Mrs. Caldwell. It's about who he is, where he comes from." "I know exactly who he is," Martha said firmly. "He's my son." Burke shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't ignore this. People are scared, asking questions." He turned to Joseph. "I think it's best if you stay out of town for a while. Let things cool down." Joseph nodded once, his face expressionless. "Understood." As they drove home, Martha fumed. "It's ridiculous, blaming a child for actions he couldn't comprehend." Joseph handled the reins with careful precision. "They're afraid, Ma, and fear makes people irrational." At home, they found a folded paper nailed to their door, a crude drawing of an Apache warrior with a knife, and below it the words, "Injun go home." Martha tore it down, crumpling it in her fist. "Cowards," she muttered. "Wouldn't dare say it to your face." Joseph took the paper gently from her hand. "They're not wrong, though, are they? I am an Injun, and this isn't really my home." "Don't you dare!" Martha's voice cracked like a whip. "This is your home. I am your family. I won't let them drive you away with ignorant threats." That evening, there was a tentative knock at their door. Joseph opened it to find Emma Larson standing in the twilight, a basket over her arm. "Emma," he said, surprised, "you shouldn't be here." "I brought some of Mother's remedy for Martha's rheumatism," she said, lifting the basket slightly. "May I come in?" Joseph glanced over his shoulder at Martha, who nodded. Emma entered, setting the basket on the table. "I heard what happened in town today." Her voice was quiet but direct. "What they're saying about you." Joseph stood stiffly by the door. "It's complicated." "Is it true?" Emma asked, looking between them. "Were you really found after an Apache raid? Were you Black Knife's son?" "Yes," Joseph admitted after a moment, "though I didn't know it until recently." Emma absorbed this, her expression thoughtful rather than fearful. "And the rest? About your role in the raids?" Joseph's jaw tightened. "I was a child. I didn't understand what was happening." "I believe you," Emma said simply. Martha watched the girl with new respect. In a town quick to judge, Emma's measured response was remarkable. "Your father knows you're here?" Martha asked. Emma's chin lifted slightly. "No. He forbade me from seeing Joseph again." She turned to him, resolute. "But I make my own decisions about who deserves my friendship." Joseph shook his head. "I don't want to cause trouble between you and your family." "The trouble was already there," Emma replied. "This just brought it to light." She reached for his hand. "You're still the same person you were last week, Joseph. The same person who taught me to ride, who discusses books with me, who defends those weaker than himself." Martha slipped quietly into the kitchen, giving them privacy. Through the window, she noticed movement at the edge of their property. Several figures on horseback, watching the house from a distance. Sheriff Burke's attempts to let things cool down clearly weren't working. The threat was real and growing. Stillwater had tolerated Joseph as Martha's adopted son. But as Black Knife's son, as a link to raids that had left scars across the territory, that was a different matter entirely. 3 days passed with Joseph rarely leaving the homestead. Martha noticed how he positioned himself between her and the road whenever they worked outside, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Each night, he checked and rechecked the locks on doors and windows before retiring. On the 4th morning, Joseph announced his intention to return to Coyote Springs. "It's not safe," Martha protested. "If word has spread." "I need to speak with Medicine Fox," Joseph said, his expression resolute. "He's the only one who might understand." both sides of this. Martha recognized the quiet determination in his voice. It was the same tone her husband had used when his mind was set. "Then I'm coming with you." Joseph shook his head. "Someone needs to stay with the farm, and you'd be in danger there." "I've been in danger before," Martha replied simply. But Joseph was adamant, and eventually Martha relented, extracting a promise that he would return by nightfall. The journey to Coyote Springs was tense, Joseph hyper-aware of every rider he passed. The trading post seemed unchanged, commerce proceeding as it always had, with the delicate balance of cultures that characterized frontier life. Medicine Fox was not at the Apache camp. A woman tending a cook fire directed Joseph to a small canyon outside town, where the old man often went to collect healing herbs. Joseph found him kneeling beside a flowering plant, carefully harvesting its roots. The medicine man looked up, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting this visit. "Nate," he greeted Joseph, using his Apache name. "You remember now." Joseph dismounted slowly. "Yes." Medicine Fox gestured for him to sit. "The memories have returned, and with them pain." "More than pain," Joseph said, settling across from the old man. "I learned that I helped guide warriors to the homes of settlers during the raids, including the family of the woman who raised me." Medicine Fox nodded gravely. "A heavy burden for a man to carry, an impossible one for a child to have understood. I led them to their deaths." Joseph's voice broke. "My actions orphaned me twice over, taking my white family, then separating me from my Apache father." "You were a child," Medicine Fox repeated. "Used as children often are in war, as eyes, as shields, as tools." He studied Joseph's face. "Yet you blame yourself as if you held the weapons. How can I not? Now that I remember, how can I live with this knowledge?" The old man reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew a long eagle feather. "This is from a bird that sees far, from great heights. It sees the whole pattern of the land, not just single footprints." He held it out. "You must learn to see as the eagle sees." Joseph accepted the feather, feeling its surprising weight. "I'm not sure I understand." "Your life bridges two worlds, Nate. You were born Apache, raised white. You have known love from both peoples, suffered loss from both peoples." Medicine Fox placed a gnarled hand on Joseph's shoulder. "This is not a curse but a blessing. Few can see through the eyes of both sides in this long conflict. The woman who raised me, Martha, she knows the truth now, yet she still calls me son. That is a powerful medicine." The old man nodded. "Stronger than hate, stronger than memory." "And my Apache father? Does he still live?" Medicine Fox's expression grew somber. "Black Knife lives in the mountains with what remains of his band. He has never stopped searching for his lost son." Joseph stared at the feather in his hands. "What would he think of me now? Raised by white settlers, speaking their language, living their ways." "He would see his blood," Medicine Fox replied, "as your white mother sees beyond your blood to your spirit." The old man rose, gathering his collected herbs. "Come, there is a ritual that might help you carry this burden." He led Joseph deeper into the canyon, to a small spring surrounded by ancient petroglyphs. There, Medicine Fox built a small fire and prepared a tea from his gathered plants. As it steeped, he instructed Joseph to remove his white man's clothes and wash in the spring. The water was shockingly cold, but Joseph felt a strange calm descend as he immersed himself. Medicine Fox sang in the Apache tongue, words Joseph couldn't understand but that resonated in his blood. After, wrapped in a blanket Medicine Fox provided, Joseph drank the bitter tea and listened as the old man spoke of balance, of carrying the weight of two worlds, of finding strength in divided heritage rather than weakness. "Your path is to be a bridge, not a warrior," Medicine Fox told him. "This is why the Creator allowed you to be lost and found, to know both peoples." As the ritual ended, Medicine Fox painted Joseph's face with simple designs, not the war paint of a raider, but the markings of a healer. "Carry this eagle feather," he instructed. "When the burden grows heavy, remember to see as the eagle sees, the whole pattern, not just your small part in it." Joseph rode home as dusk gathered, the eagle feather secured inside his shirt. For the first time since the terrible revelations, he felt a fragile peace within himself. Not forgiveness, he wasn't sure that was possible, but perhaps a path toward understanding. Martha was waiting on the porch, rifle across her lap. She stood as he approached, relief evident in her face. "Joseph," she called. "Thank God you're safe." As he dismounted, she noticed the faint traces of paint still visible on his skin, the changed look in his eyes. She didn't question him, simply held the door open. "Come inside," she said. "There's much to discuss." Martha knew something had changed in Joseph when he returned from his meeting with Medicine Fox. A certain peace had settled over him, not erasing his burden but somehow making it bearable. That night, he shared with her everything the old medicine man had told him, including the revelation that his father, Black Knife, was still alive. "What will you do with that knowledge?" Martha asked, her heart constricting at the thought of Joseph seeking out his Apache father. "I don't know yet," Joseph answered honestly. "But I needed to know." Morning brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Miller's buggy approached their homestead, but it was Eleanor Wilson who drove it, alone. "She shouldn't be here," Joseph said, tensing as he recognized her from the window. Martha touched his arm. "Let me speak with her first." She met Eleanor at the door, blocking the entrance with her body. "Mrs. Wilson." Eleanor looked drawn, her eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. "I need to speak with you." "With Joseph." "I think you've said enough already," Martha replied coolly. "Your words have turned the town against us." "I know." Eleanor's voice held genuine regret. "That's partly why I've come. May I enter?" After a moment's hesitation, Martha stepped aside. Joseph stood in the center of the main room, straight-backed and solemn as Eleanor entered. Neither spoke, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy between them. Martha broke the silence. "What brings you here, Mrs. Wilson?" Eleanor removed her gloves slowly. "After our last encounter, I was consumed with anger. Old grief reopened." Her gaze fixed on Joseph. "I told Thomas, Dr. Miller, everything. About recognizing you, about your connection to the raids." Joseph nodded, accepting this without surprise. "But last night," Eleanor continued, "I found something I'd forgotten." She reached into her bag and withdrew a leather pouch. "This belonged to my husband." She opened it carefully, revealing a warrior's necklace of bear claws. "Edward received this as a gift from an Apache chief who visited our homestead to trade, months before the raids. He brought his young son with him." Martha's breath caught. "Black Knife." Eleanor nodded. "I didn't make the connection then. But looking at this, remembering that day," she turned to Joseph. "You were that child. You played with my Mary while your father and my husband conducted business." Joseph stared at the necklace, another piece of his fragmented memory sliding into place. "I remember," he said softly. "A white house with blue flowers painted on the door. A girl with yellow hair who showed me a hidden space beneath the floor." "The root cellar," Eleanor confirmed, her voice tight with emotion. "Where she hid during the raid. Where they found her." Martha moved to Joseph's side, sensing his renewed anguish. "Mrs. Wilson, what is the purpose of this visit? To cause more pain?" Eleanor shook her head. "To understand. When the raid happened, I was away visiting a neighbor. I returned to find my home in flames, my family dead." Her hands trembled around the pouch. "For 20 years, I've carried nothing but hatred for those responsible. It consumed me." She looked directly at Joseph. "But you were a child." a child who had played with my daughter in peace weeks before. You couldn't have understood what would happen when you showed the warriors our home. Joseph spoke with difficulty. Understanding doesn't undo what happened. No, Eleanor agreed. Nothing can undo it. But Thomas reminded me what hatred has cost me. 20 years of my life spent in bitterness. She took a deep breath. I don't want to spend what remains of my life the same way. Martha watched her carefully, scarcely daring to hope. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't forgive yet, Eleanor admitted. But I can try to understand. And I can acknowledge that blaming a 3-year-old child for the actions of warriors is misplaced. She turned to Martha. You lost your family in the same raids. Yet you took in this child, raised him as your own, without knowing his connection to your loss. That kind of grace. Her voice faltered. It humbles me. Joseph stepped forward, his movements deliberate. I have no right to ask your forgiveness, Mrs. Wilson, but I am deeply sorry for the role I played in your loss. If there was any way I could change what happened. There isn't, Eleanor interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. For either of us. We can only choose what to do with the life we have now. She replaced the necklace in her bag. The town is agitated. Sheriff Burke is trying to maintain order, but emotions are running high. I've come to warn you, and to tell you I've spoken with my brother about moderating my earlier statements. Martha's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. Joseph, may I ask you something? He nodded warily. If you could speak to your Apache father now, what would you say to him? Joseph considered the question carefully. I would ask him why. Why the raids, why the killing? And I would tell him about the woman who saved me, who taught me that compassion can exist even in the aftermath of unimaginable loss. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. You're a good man, Joseph Caldwell. Perhaps that's the greatest testament to Martha's wisdom in saving you. The riders appeared at dusk, a line of torches snaking along the road to Martha's homestead. Joseph spotted them first from the barn where he'd been working late, counting at least 15 mounted men. Ma! He called, rushing to the house. They're coming. Martha was already at the window, rifle in hand. I see them. They had been expecting this since Eleanor's warning the day before. Martha had spent the morning hiding valuables and preparing the house for potential defense, while Joseph had moved the horses to a hidden corral in the back canyon. You should go, Martha said, checking the rifle's ammunition. Take the back trail through the wash. They won't find you in the dark. Joseph shook his head. I won't leave you to face them alone. This is about you, Joseph. If you're gone, they'll have no reason to. To what? Burn our home? Hurt you? Joseph's expression was grim. We both know what angry mobs do. The riders were close enough now to identify. Sheriff Burke led them, his face set in official determination. Behind him rode Bill Cooper and his brothers, the Peterson boys, and several ranch hands from neighboring properties. Most carried torches. Some had rifles or pistols visible in their hands. Joseph, Martha said urgently, let me speak to them first. Promise me you won't come out until I call for you. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. But at the first sign of trouble, I can handle myself, Martha reminded him, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I've been doing it since before you were born. She stepped onto the porch as the riders reached the yard, their horses' hooves kicking up dust in the fading light. The sheriff raised his hand, halting the group. Mrs. Caldwell, he called. We've come for the Indian. Martha's grip tightened on her rifle. This is private property, Sheriff. You and your men are trespassing. Burke dismounted slowly. Now, Martha, don't make this difficult. The town council has met and decided Joseph needs to answer some questions about his involvement with Black Knife's band. What involvement? Martha demanded. He was a child. Be that as it may, Burke continued, "He's Black Knife's son. The son of a murderer who killed good people from this town. Folks are nervous, want some assurances." Bill Cooper spat on the ground. "Assurances, hell. We want justice." Several men murmured agreement, their torches casting sinister shadows across angry faces. "Justice for what?" Martha challenged. "For a 3-year-old being where his father took him? Think about what you're saying, all of you. Would you blame a child for his father's actions?" "We ain't talking about no child," Cooper retorted. "We're talking about a grown Indian living among us, pretending to be one of us. For all we know, he's been reporting back to his people all these years." Martha's laugh was bitter. "Reporting what exactly? How you overcharge for flour at your store. How your son tormented him in school." Cooper's face darkened. He urged his horse forward, only to be stopped by Burke's outstretched arm. "Martha," the sheriff said, his voice lowering, "this doesn't have to get ugly. Just send Joseph out. We'll take him to town, ask our questions, and sort this out proper." "And if I refuse?" Burke sighed. "Then I can't guarantee these men will stay peaceful." He gestured at the agitated group behind him. "They've got families, Martha. They're scared." The front door opened, and Joseph stepped onto the porch. He changed into the clothes Medicine Fox had given him, a blend of white and Apache garments that somehow suited him perfectly. "I'm here," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "There's no need to threaten Mrs. Caldwell." "Joseph, no," Martha whispered. He touched her shoulder gently. "It's all right, Ma. This has to end." Joseph descended the porch steps and walked forward until he stood directly before the sheriff. The mounted men shifted nervously, some reaching for weapons. "You want to know about my connection to Black Knife," Joseph stated calmly. "Yes, I believe he was my father. Yes, I was with his band during the raids of 1868. I was 3 years old." He looked around at the gathered men. "Many of you have known me all my life. Have I ever given you reason to fear me?" "You're Apache," someone called from the back. "That's reason enough." "I am Apache by blood," Joseph acknowledged. "And I am a settler by raising. I stand in both worlds, belonging fully to neither." He turned to Burke. "If you wish to arrest me, Sheriff, do so. But I've committed no crime." Burke hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Before he could respond, Cooper urged his horse forward. "This is a waste of time," he growled. "We all know Indians can't be trusted. I say we take him now. Teach him and any other Apache thinking of coming near Stillwater a lesson." He drew his pistol, pointing it at Joseph. Martha raised her rifle in response, aiming squarely at Cooper. "Lower that gun," she ordered, her voice deadly calm, "or I'll put a bullet through you before you can pull the trigger." The standoff hung in the balance, tension crackling like the torches that illuminated the scene. Then a new voice called from the darkness. "That's enough." All heads turned as Emma Larson rode into the yard, her father close behind her. Samuel Larson dismounted, helping Emma down from her horse. His face was grave as he surveyed the scene. Cooper's drawn pistol, Martha's raised rifle, Joseph standing exposed between them. "What madness is this?" Larson demanded. "Threatening a woman on her own property? Drawing weapons against an unarmed man?" "Stay out of this, Larson," Cooper growled. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," Larson replied firmly. "Is this what Stillwater has become? A place where mobs dispense their own version of justice?" Emma moved to stand beside Joseph, her action deliberate and unmistakable in its meaning. A murmur ran through the gathered men. "Emma," her father warned, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I won't stand by while good people are threatened," she said. "Joseph is no more responsible for raids that happened when he was a child than I am for wars fought by my ancestors." Sheriff Burke looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Larson, please control your daughter." This is a delicate situation. I can see that, Larson responded dryly. What I don't see is any legal basis for this gathering. He gestured at the armed men. Is there a warrant for Joseph's arrest, Sheriff? Burke shifted in his saddle. No, but then you have no authority to take him anywhere, Larson interrupted. And these men have no business being here with torches and weapons. Cooper's pistol remained aimed at Joseph. The Indian's father killed my uncle, killed dozens of our people. You expect us to just let his son live among us? Joseph, Caldwell has lived among us for 20 years, Larson countered. In all that time, has he ever harmed anyone? Has he not worked honestly, dealt fairly, helped neighbors in need? Before Cooper could respond, another rider approached from the road. Eleanor Wilson rode into the yard, her brother Dr. Miller beside her. Thomas, Sheriff Burke acknowledged, clearly relieved to see the respected physician. Perhaps you can talk some sense into these people. Dr. Miller surveyed the scene with a clinical eye. It appears sense is what's needed here, but not from the Caldwells. He dismounted, helping his sister down. Eleanor has something to say. Eleanor Wilson stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the armed men. I lost my husband and daughter in the raids, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. For 20 years, I've carried hatred for those responsible. She moved to stand beside Martha on the porch. When I learned Joseph was connected to the raids, I was consumed with anger. I spoke without thought, without consideration of the full truth. And what is the full truth, Mrs. Wilson? Burke asked. That Joseph was a child used by warriors, not responsible for their actions. That blaming him for what happened is both unjust and irrational. She straightened her shoulders. If you persist in this course, you'll have to go through me as well. Cooper laughed harshly. 3 women and a shopkeeper against 15 armed men? Those ain't odds I'd worry about. Make that 4 women, called a new voice as Reverend Clark's wife rode into the yard. And 1 minister's wife who'll make sure every decent Christian in the territory knows what happened here tonight. The Reverend himself appeared behind her, along with several other townspeople who had followed the commotion. The balance of power was shifting, the mob certainly fracturing as more witnesses arrived. William, Mrs. Clark addressed Cooper. What would your mother say if she could see you now? Threatening Martha Caldwell, who nursed your sister through scarlet fever. Pointing a gun at a man who's never raised a hand against you. Cooper's pistol wavered slightly. Sheriff Burke seized the moment, urging his horse between Cooper and Joseph. Lower your weapon, Bill. That's an order. For a tense moment, Cooper seemed ready to defy him. Then, with a muttered curse, he holstered his pistol. Burke turned to the gathered crowd, removing his badge and holding it up. This badge means something. It means law, not vengeance. Not mob rule. He looked at Joseph. If there are questions about your past, we'll address them properly, through legal channels. And what about him being Black Knife's son? Someone called. A man isn't his father, Burke replied. We judge people by their own actions in this territory. Or at least we should. He replaced his badge, his decision made. This gathering is over. Anyone who stays on the Caldwell property without permission will be arrested for trespassing. Cooper and several others protested, but the sheriff's authority, bolstered by the arrival of more moderate townspeople, prevailed. Slowly, reluctantly, the mob began to disperse. As they departed, Martha finally lowered her rifle. Joseph stood motionless, watching them go, Emma still at his side. Eleanor Wilson approached him cautiously. I'm sorry, she said quietly. My words nearly got you killed. Joseph shook his head. Your words only exposed what was already there. The fear, the hatred, and the friendship, Emma added, taking his hand. Samuel Larson watched this gesture with a complex expression, concern mixed with reluctant acceptance. Joseph, he said finally. It seems my daughter has made her choice clear. I can't say I'm entirely comfortable with it, but... He glanced at the retreating mob. I know which side of this divide I want to stand on. As the last riders disappeared down the road, an uneasy quiet settled over the homestead. The group that remained, Martha, Joseph, Emma, the Larsons, Eleanor, and Dr. Miller, the Clarks, stood in awkward silence, the weight of what had nearly happened heavy in the air. Martha was the first to speak. I think we could all use some coffee. The suggestion broke the tension. Mrs. Clark chuckled softly. Martha Caldwell, you've always had a gift for understatement. They moved inside, crowding around Martha's small table. Joseph built up the fire while Martha prepared coffee, their domestic routine a stark contrast to the violence that had nearly erupted minutes before. It's not over, Joseph said quietly as he placed cups before their unexpected guests. Cooper and his kind won't forget this night. Sheriff Burke, who had remained behind, nodded solemnly. He's right. Tonight was a close thing. Too close. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I should have seen it coming. Should have stopped it before it got this far. We all bear some responsibility, Reverend Clark said, accepting a cup from Martha. When we allow fear and old hatreds to go unchallenged, this is the inevitable result. Dr. Miller cleared his throat. What happens now? The question hung in the air, directed at no one in particular but demanding an answer from all of them. Martha looked at Joseph, leaving the choice to him. He stood by the fireplace, the flames illuminating his features that carried the clear stamp of his Apache heritage, yet were as familiar to everyone present as their own neighbors. I won't run, Joseph said finally. This is my home. Has been for 20 years. It might not be safe, Sheriff Burke warned. Not everyone will be as easily turned back as they were tonight. Then we must make it safe, Larson said decisively. Not just for Joseph, but for all of us. He looked around the table. What happened tonight shames Stillwater. We're better than this, or we should be. Emma nodded vigorously. We need to help people understand. Joseph isn't a threat. He's a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Noble sentiments, Burke said. But you're talking about changing minds that have been set for generations. Settlers and Apache have been killing each other since before any of us arrived. And yet here we sit, Eleanor observed. Settlers and the son of an Apache warrior, sharing coffee instead of bloodshed. She smiled faintly. Perhaps change is possible after all. It will take more than coffee and goodwill, Joseph said. It will take time. And truth. He reached into his shirt and withdrew the eagle feather medicine Fox had given him. A wise man told me my path is to be a bridge, not a warrior. Perhaps this is what he meant. Martha watched him with a mixture of pride and concern. In the space of a few tumultuous days, he had gone from her son to a symbol, a living embodiment of the territory's painful history and uncertain future. As their visitors prepared to leave, Sheriff Burke took Joseph aside. I meant what I said about doing this properly, he said. But there will be questions. The territorial governor might get involved. This isn't just about Stillwater anymore. Joseph nodded. I understand. For what it's worth, Burke added awkwardly. I've known you since you were knee-high. Never saw anything in you but Martha's raising, whatever blood you carry. The sheriff's badge lay where it had fallen during the confrontation, trampled into the dirt of the yard. Joseph retrieved it, brushing off the dust before handing it back. Thank you for choosing the law tonight, he said simply. Burke replaced the badge on his vest. Wasn't much of a choice in the end. Man either stands for something or he falls for anything. After the last visitor had gone, Martha and Joseph stood on the porch, watching the distant lights of their departing guests wind down the road to town. You could have run, Martha said softly. When you first saw them coming, you could have escaped into the hills. Joseph put his arm around her shoulders. And leave you to face them alone? What kind of son would that make me? Martha leaned against him, allowing herself to draw strength from the man he had become. When I found you, all those years ago, I thought I was saving you. You were, Joseph assured her. Perhaps, Martha said, or perhaps we were saving each other. She looked up at him, this child of her enemy who had become the center of her world. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Joseph nodded, his gaze drawn to the distant mountains where, somewhere, his Apache father might still wait, unaware that his lost son had been found, lost, and found again in ways none could have imagined. Together, he agreed, as family. Dawn revealed the scars of the previous night's confrontation. Trampled earth, scattered torch remnants, a broken fence post. Martha and Joseph worked silently, restoring order to their homestead. It felt important somehow, this simple act of rebuilding. They were repairing the porch steps when the first wagon appeared on the horizon. Joseph tensed, reaching for the rifle he'd kept close since awakening. Wait, Martha said, squinting against the morning sun. That's Samuel Larson's wagon. As it drew closer, they saw Emma and her father were not alone. Several townspeople accompanied them, the Peterson family, whose chickens Joseph had paid for when helping the elderly Apache. Dr. Miller and Eleanor Wilson, Reverend Clark and his wife. Most surprisingly, Sheriff Burke rode alongside, his official presence lending weight to this unexpected delegation. What's this? Martha murmured as the wagon stopped in their yard. Larson approached, hat in hand. We've come to help, he said simply. Figured your place could use some tending after last night's trouble. Joseph looked past him to the others, their expressions ranging from determined to uncomfortable. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, Emma answered, already rolling up her sleeves. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Men replaced broken fence posts and repaired the porch. Women prepared a midday meal big enough to feed everyone. Children, brought along by their parents, played cautiously around Joseph until his gentle manner won them over. Martha watched in amazement as her solitary homestead transformed into a community gathering. Not everyone from Stillwater had come. Cooper and his supporters were notably absent, but enough had made the journey to make their statement clear. Near noon, as they paused for the meal Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Clark had prepared, Reverend Clark called for everyone's attention. It seems appropriate, he said, to bless this food and this gathering. He cleared his throat. But perhaps first we might benefit from another perspective. To Martha's surprise, he gestured to the edge of the property where Medicine Fox stood observing the activity. The old Apache had appeared silently sometime during the morning, speaking with Joseph briefly before keeping a respectful distance. Would you join us? Clark invited. And perhaps share a blessing in your tradition? A murmur ran through the gathered townspeople. Such an invitation was unprecedented, acknowledgement of Apache traditions as equally valid to Christian ones. Medicine Fox approached slowly, his dignified bearing commanding respect despite his advanced years. I am honored, he said in careful English, and I see good medicine here today, the medicine of healing between peoples. He spoke in Apache first, then translated, We give thanks to the Creator who makes all people from the same earth, who gives all the same need for food, shelter, and love. We ask for wisdom to see beyond differences to the common heart that beats in all. Reverend Clark bowed his head in acknowledgement before offering his own prayer. The two men, one Christian minister, one Apache medicine man, standing side by side created an image few present would ever forget. As they ate, Joseph found himself seated between Emma and Eleanor Wilson. The older woman had been quiet throughout the morning, helping with the work but keeping to herself. I want you to know, she said softly, that I've written to the territorial governor. I told him about you, about your unique position between our worlds. She met his gaze directly, I suggested that voices like yours are needed if there's ever to be true peace in the territory. Joseph was silent for a moment, processing her words. Thank you, he finally said, though I'm not sure one voice can make much difference. It already has, Emma pointed out, gesturing to the gathering around them. Look at what's happening here. After the meal, as work resumed, Martha found Joseph sitting alone on a newly repaired section of fence, watching the activity with a thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, settling beside him. Joseph nodded toward where Medicine Fox was showing several curious children how to weave a small basket from reeds gathered near the creek. He says I should learn both ways, Apache and settler, and teach others. Be a bridge. Martha smiled. You already are. Joseph turned to her, his expression serious. I've been thinking about my Apache father. About Black Knife. Martha's smile faded. I thought you might be. Medicine Fox says he still lives. That he never stopped searching for me. Joseph hesitated. I think I need to find him, to understand that part of myself completely. Martha nodded slowly, though her heart constricted at the thought. I understand. Would you? Joseph hesitated. Would you come with me? When the time comes. Martha blinked back sudden tears. After everything, the revelation of his role in her family's death, the confrontation with the town. He still wanted her beside him for this most personal of journeys. Yes, she said simply. Whenever you're ready. 5 years passed, changing. Stillwater in ways few could have imagined. The territorial governor, intrigued by Eleanor Wilson's letter about a settler-raised Apache who had bridged 2 worlds, had visited personally. Impressed by what he found, he established an experimental peace commission with Joseph as its cultural interpreter. The Caldwell homestead had grown, adding rooms to accommodate Joseph and Emma after their wedding, and later, for their son, a boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentle smile. They named him Thomas, after Dr. Miller who had delivered him, but his Apache name, given by Medicine Fox in a private ceremony, was Denali, Bridge Builder. Martha sat on the expanded porch, watching her grandson play in the yard. At 67, her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but her eyes remained sharp, missing nothing of the life flourishing around her. He's getting faster, Joseph observed, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. Soon he'll outrun us all. Martha accepted the cup gratefully, just like his father at that age. They sat in comfortable silence, the ease of family who no longer needed words to communicate every thought. In the distance, smoke rose from cooking fires at the small Apache encampment that had established itself on the edge of Stillwater. Not Black Knife's band. That reunion had happened years ago, a story unto itself, but families who had chosen to settle peacefully near the town, following the tentative truce Joseph had helped broker. Eleanor's coming for supper, Martha said. She's bringing that new teacher from Boston. Joseph nodded. Eleanor Wilson had become an unlikely ally, channeling her formidable energy into education that included both settler and Apache children. The school she'd helped establish was small but growing, teaching in both English and Apache languages. Hard to believe how much has changed, Joseph mused. Yet for all the progress, challenges remained. Some settlers still kept their distance from the Apache. Some Apache still viewed the settlers with justified suspicion. The wounds of generations could not heal in mere years. But each small step, a shared meal, a child's friendship, a fair trade, built upon the last. Medicine Fox would be proud, Martha said. The old man had passed the previous winter, honored by both communities in a ceremony that blended traditions in ways that would have been unthinkable before. Joseph touched the eagle feather he still wore, now accompanied by a small silver cross, symbols of the dual heritage he had come to embrace rather than fight. He saw possibilities the rest of us couldn't imagine. As did you, Emma said, joining them on the porch with little Thomas. She had grown into a confident woman, respected in both communities for her work alongside Joseph. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A small delegation from the Apache camp approached, led by a dignified elder on a painted pony. "Your father," Martha said softly. Joseph nodded, rising to greet Black Knife. Their relationship remained complex, weighted with history, with culture, with the unbridgeable gulf of 20 lost years. But they had found a tentative respect, if not the easy familiarity Joseph shared with Martha. As Black Knife dismounted, Thomas broke free from Emma's grasp and ran to him, chattering in a fluid mix of English and Apache that made the old warrior's stern face soften with pride. Martha watched as Joseph greeted his Apache father. The years had transformed her fear into acceptance, even gratitude. Black Knife had given her Joseph twice, first through tragedy, then by accepting his son's choice to remain in both worlds rather than reclaiming him fully to Apache ways. Emma settled beside Martha, following her gaze. "He's a remarkable man," she said. "Both of them are," Martha replied, including Black Knife in her assessment. Together they watched as grandfather, father, and son walked toward the new barn, where Joseph had been teaching Thomas to care for a foal. 3 generations moving forward while honoring what came before. Martha thought of the day she'd found Joseph, a terrified child among the ashes of her former life. She had saved him then, not knowing he was connected to her family's killers, not knowing he would one day save her from the bitter woman she might have become. The mystery of it all still humbled her. How hatred could transform to love, how enemies could become family, how a simple act of compassion toward a child could ripple outward, touching countless lives. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across land that had witnessed both bloodshed and reconciliation, Martha offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For Joseph, for Emma and Thomas, for the painful, beautiful journey that had brought them all to this moment. Life had not given her what she expected. It had given her something far more precious. A family forged through tragedy and grace, stronger for the broken places that had healed.